So we spoke last week about the MVP and taking the MVP to market, or minimum viable product to market, as quickly as possible. And we spoke about getting it out there, testing it, seeing what's working, and starting to get that preliminary feedback. Once you've done that, and what I want to talk about today is, I guess, understanding what that feedback is, learning how to prioritize it and take that and organize it in a way that makes it easy to manage, and also then knowing what the next steps are. So effectively understanding what to action and what not to action. So it's pretty simple, and again, the purpose of this conversation is to keep things as simple as possible. This is about helping startups, helping entrepreneurs, helping businesses get off the ground, get to market as quickly as possible, and allow them to not get caught up in all of the mixed messages or all of the, I guess, too much detail or too much I guess of the noise that can occur and the overwhelm that can occur when starting a business, because it's actually not that hard. So you've taken your product to market. What the first step, or the first thing that I recommend you do, or that you consider doing, is individually, one-on-one, and yes, this means you to your customer, to whoever's already starting to transact or deal with you, have a conversation with them. Ask for 5 minutes of their time, get on the phone, send them an email, say, I'd love to set up a bit of a time to call you, or whatever you think is going to work best with them. And just ask them a couple of questions, 3, 4, 5 questions. How did they find the experience? How easy was it to use whatever interface it was that you've provided for them? Why did they use it? What do they see as being the biggest benefits? And then, of course, what you believe, or what they believe you could improve. You've always got to take that last comment, though, with a grain of salt. However, don't be too quick to write off that feedback, because every bit of feedback is important. The trick is to discern it and to understand it, and then be able to prioritize that to establish whether you would action it or not. So what I'd recommend is you ask that question, what do you think? And what do you think we can improve? What did you really like? What could work better? So you take that feedback and literally line by line, just open up a spreadsheet and just list every single comment, bit of feedback, bit of advice, ideas, whatever it might be that your customers, the people that have been trialing the product or testing the product, what they have to say, just list it out. Don't discount it at this stage. Then if you're on your own or you're working with your partners, as I suggest, one thing I would suggest is taking a bit of time out, trying to be as objective as possible, and just rank on a 1, 2, 3 or a red, green, orange system, something that gives you a priority. So 1 being, that's a really good idea, that's really important, we should implement it. 2 being, oh look, that's a nice to have, and we'll put it into our pipeline for when we get a bit of time. And then 3, or potentially the red color, that could be, it's a nice to have, or it's a great idea, but it's not a priority for us right now. What you'll find is that when you do that list first, is the first thing to look for are double ups, or are things that have been brought up repetitively. That's usually a good sign. At least, if you've got multiple people testing or using your product or your service or whatever it might be, and you've got this feedback, if you find that something's raised, 1, 2, 3, 4 times, so multiple times, that's usually a good indication of an area that you may want to put some priority to. So that's the easiest way to, I guess, segment, prioritize. And then from an execution perspective, your next step is then to put a basic plan together to start implementing those changes slowly. So from the green priority, or the number 1 priority, start chipping away at those and creating activities for you and your team or your partners to start working on those. So I know a number of startups have experienced this, and I know I've experienced this myself, but it's easy to take the comments of an individual, sometimes even a couple of individuals, and just go, gung-ho in changing your product or changing your system or your service to suit that feedback. What I would suggest is that you always give it a little bit of time before you make major changes. And we call a major change or a significant change to your product or service a pivot. So entrepreneurs, you'll often hear the word, or startups will often talk about they've done a pivot. So they went in there, they built this model, they built an idea, and then they realised that there was something that could be improved or something that needed to be done differently, or the market didn't respond the way they thought, so they pivoted and they maybe niched down or they focused on something. A great example that I've experienced recently with one of my startups, which is called Movable, is when we started out, we were originally, we're effectively the Uber of removalists. So the plan was to always basically intercept backloads. So we had our customers were removalists, or our removalists, and what we do is we take their spare capacity and we effectively sell that capacity in their trucks to consumers, to people that are looking to move, that don't necessarily need a whole truck. They may only need 5 cubic meters or 10 cubic meters or 20 cubic meters. So they only need a small amount to move, and they need to move interstate. It's often quite expensive to get a whole truck. So we find the trucks that have a spare bit of space and we use that. When we started out, we were only focused on trucks that were coming back from an interstate destination. So that's what they call a backload. And what we quickly found out, there were two things that we sort of changed our business model around. And the first was that we didn't just need to take the backload. We could actually take the trip there. There was often trucks, so 70 cubic meter trucks, that were only using 50 cubic meters going from Sydney to Brisbane. So that means there's still 20 cubic meters that were available that could still be sold, and that would be extra profit for those removalists. And we could buy that space and sell it to consumers who only had 10 cubic meters or 5 cubic meters to move at a discounted rate. So that was the first change we made, is that we didn't just take the backloads, we also took the trips there if space was available. The second change we made is that we really focused on no bigger than 2-bedroom apartments. So our focus is basically 2-bedroom apartments or smaller. So effectively minimum of 5 cubic meters up to somewhere between 10 and 20 cubic meters, which is the average 1 to 2 bedroom apartment. Because again, for a lot of removalists, they typically wouldn't take that work by themselves because it's normally too expensive for the consumer to spend, $4,000 or $5,000 to move that much stuff interstate, whereas they could spend $1,000 or $2,000 by basically hitching a ride with another load or with a bigger load that's already going in that direction. And we effectively bridge the gap between the trucks that are going interstate and the people that are looking to move that have smaller amounts of stuff. So there were two changes we made, and it took us almost a year to make those changes because we started realizing and testing that we didn't want to compete with all of the removalists, and we didn't want to override their existing businesses. And we also knew that we didn't want to be trying to get the business or those bigger loads of the consumers that typically, when they're moving like a 4-bedroom house or 5-bedroom house, it's a lot more involved, it's a lot more expensive, there's a lot more to consider. So we really tried to focus on the smaller moves, the smaller quantities, and making that as cost effective and as affordable for a lot more people. And so we implemented those changes. But as I said, it took up to a year to make those changes and really understand the market, and all of that actually came from speaking to our customers, so speaking to the removalists, as well as speaking to the consumers. So knowing what their pain points are, knowing, that, for instance, most consumers trying to move a 2-bedroom house, every time they called a removalist, most removalists didn't really want to know about it because, to be honest, it's a lot of effort for a small amount of return. So we tried to make that transaction super simple. We solved a real meaningful problem. We're reducing carbon emissions by ensuring that we're using as much space on those trucks as possible so that no transport is wasted. And that for us was an important pivot that we made as a business. So I hope that sort of sets the example. I hope that helps paint the picture of how to understand and ask the right questions of your customers, how to then list their feedback and their responses into a spreadsheet, and then prioritize and rank those into what you believe are the changes that you should action or implement. Hope that helps. Until next time.